My first introduction to muscle testing was way back in 1969 when I was working as a remedial masseur backup for an osteopath in Coventry. He'd gone to America to do a talk on sports injuries. He was working with rugby players at that time, and he'd done a part of the seminar was a man called Dr George Goodhart, and his presentation was on muscle testing. This so impressed my employer. When he came home, he had a muscle testing manual and started to do some of the muscle tests on me. The result of those tests I'd done at 19, I was fairly fit. I'd done some weight training, that sort of thing in that time. And when he did some of the muscle tests, some of the muscles, surprisingly, he could press down quite easily. And when he did the activation, reflex corrections on the muscles in my leg were immediately very, very strong, which amazed me at that time. What I understand now is that was applied kinesiology, which was a different slant on muscle tests to the way they had been used. Many years before, the main Bible on muscle testing was Kendall and Kendall, and what they were doing was primarily testing the strength of a muscle so that if someone had had an injury, they could prove how much of a dysfunction in grades that the person's lost as a result of that injury to try and make some claims for compensation. Dr. Goodhart's approach was very, very different because he was linking together meridians, lymphatics, neurovasculars, origin insertion work, which was primarily the research of Dr. Bennett and Chapman's reflexes that actually reflexogenically affected the muscles, and he wanted that all into one bundle. The reason he wanted these in one place is that he was researching the recurrence of spinal subluxations where a vertebra was going out of alignment but recurring, and he wanted to understand much more about the permanency of these corrections. So this research led him over the 60s and into the 70s to build a model called applied kinesiology. As a spin-off of that, him and Dr. John Thea, who was his co-worker, developed a system where they could actually teach the clients at home some home care postural muscle checks that could sort of make the corrections last longer that the chiropractors were actually making at that time. Dr. John Thea then popularised that system into a system called Touch for Health, and I learnt this system primarily from a man called Brian Butler back in the 70s, and he presented at my college a muscle testing weekend, which impressed me so much because I already had some initial knowledge of kinesiology to want to learn more. So I actually hired him over the next 18 months for over 100 hours of personal tuition, and then I hired the personal services of a lady called Yoka Brouwer, who was the European Muscle Health for Touch for Health instructor at that time, for an 8-day course, again on personal tuition, to learn these muscle tests more. I then decided to go to America and become the second instructor in this country of the Touch for Health system, which I did in 1979, and there's my certificate from way back in that time. Since then, I developed my practice in 1974, and I was then actively using muscle tests all of the time as part of the differential diagnosis they were making, as well as the orthopedic muscle range checks on the joints and everything else, and also the pre and post checks to show the client that those weak muscles had now re-established the postural tone that we were looking for good postural alignment and correction. A lot of what Dr. Goodhart found was that the spindle cell settings in the muscles, when they become strained, went out of alignment and left the muscle in a weakened state. The neurology was then switched off temporarily to that muscle. So this was a neurological muscle weakness, not a strength weakness. And so it was tested very lightly, as opposed to the Kendall and Kendall method, which was actually graded to see how strong you were and pushing with a lot of force to grade that strength. Kinesiology, however, is a very subtle art and done very lightly but very precisely by approximating the origin and insertion of the muscle and then just checking the tone of that muscle to see if its postural set is neurologically hooked up to the brain. And some of the corrections that we can start to use in here, we can alter the spindle cell settings by manual pressure. Sometimes the fascia of the muscle will become distorted with inflammation or inflammatory stress to the muscle, so we can strip that muscle out or wring it out. And there's various other ANMA procedures using pressure that change the whole neurological and motor constitution to muscles once they become strained, to bring them back to good postural alignment. So that's how we use muscles as part of our differential diagnosis in the analysis of man the upright bipedal.